History remembers the Crusades as distant wars fought across deserts and foreign kingdoms, holy warriors marching toward faraway enemies. But hidden beneath those grand tales lies a crusade so dark, so inward-facing, that the Church spent centuries burying its traces. This crusade was not launched against rival empires, nor pagans, nor distant kings. It was unleashed against their own people, the very citizens who prayed beneath their altars and built their cathedrals stone by stone. It began in the late 12th century, when whispers of a small but growing movement reached the ears of the most powerful churchmen. Ordinary villagers, farmers, scribes, stonemasons had begun to question why the Church demanded gold from starving families, why sacred texts were hidden behind locked chambers, why salvation had become something one could purchase. These were not rebels. They were desperate believers searching for truth. But truth was dangerous. The Church called them heretics, though most had never lifted a weapon. Their gatherings were peaceful, their debates quiet, yet fear spread within the high walls of Rome. A frightened authority can become more brutal than any invading army. Meetings were held in candlelit halls. Bishops spoke of preserving purity. Cardinals warned that ideas traveled faster than swords. Some argued for diplomacy, others for punishment. But one voice, calm, steady, wrapped in velvet authority, shifted the entire room. If they cannot be controlled, he said, they must be removed. And so began a crusade that dared not speak its name, not across continents, not against distant enemies, but through the villages, farms, and towns of Europe against their own neighbors, their own kin, their own believers. It was the crusade that turned faith into a battlefield and made ordinary people the enemy. The movement that the Church feared did not begin with swords or banners. It began with a whisper. In a quiet valley town, a gray-haired scribe named Marceline copied fragments of scripture that villagers were never allowed to read. He did not preach rebellion. He simply believed that faith belonged to everyone, not only to those wearing jeweled rings. Soon, people from neighboring villages walked miles just to hear him explain what the Church kept hidden. Word reached the local bishop, and fear spread like smoke. If common people learned what was written in those forbidden pages, if they understood salvation without payment, the wealth and authority of entire dioceses would crumble. What frightened the Church was not disobedience, but enlightenment. So new laws appeared suddenly, carved into wooden boards and nailed to town gates. Unauthorized reading of Holy Scripture is an offense against God. Gatherings without clergy approval are heresy. To question these laws was to question God himself, or so people were told. Marceline's quiet meetings became secret gatherings. Candles were hidden inside clay pots. Scripture pages were wrapped in cloth and carried beneath coats. What had once been simple curiosity became a forbidden act. Every whisper now sounded like treason. The Church sent investigators disguised as travelers. They sat in taverns, listened to gossip, followed villagers through forests. A single, careless conversation could condemn an entire family. Farmers grew afraid to speak truth even inside their own homes. Walls, they believed, had learned to listen, but fear could not seal every mouth. The ideas spread anyway, not through shouts, but through murmurs in the dark. A baker passed a line from Scripture to his daughter. A shepherd repeated a story to a friend on the hillside. A widow whispered a verse over a dying child. One spark became many. What the Church had failed to understand was simple. You can burn a book, but not memory. And so the quiet movement grew. one forbidden whisper at a time, until whispers became meetings, and meetings became a threat that Rome could no longer ignore. By the time the Church fully realized the scope of the movement, it was no longer small or localized. Villagers across valleys and hillsides were sharing forbidden texts, questioning old decrees, and daring to pray outside official rituals. The very heart of Europe's faith, the communities that built cathedrals with their own hands, had become a threat, and the Church acted. The first punishments were subtle, almost invisible. Farmers disappeared overnight, leaving only a note in a foreign hand, for the preservation of the faithful. Homes were searched, scrolls, books, and personal letters confiscated and burned. The words heresy and rebellion became interchangeable. Parents trembled when children asked questions. Neighbors feared one another. Yet the Church wanted more than silence. It wanted absolute control. Bishops sent envoys disguised as traders, traveling through villages with lists of names. Anyone caught copying, sharing, or even discussing forbidden texts was summoned. Some were sent to monasteries to learn the correct way. Many never returned. Others were imprisoned in dark stone towers, their only crime curiosity itself. In one small town, the scribe Marcelin was caught. His manuscripts were set ablaze in the public square, the flames licking the edges of parchment as villagers watched in silent horror. The Church hoped fear would suffocate the movement, but instead it spread like wildfire. People whispered about the martyr quietly, passing his words in secret. This was the first true spark of the hidden war, a crusade not waged with swords on foreign soil, but with fear and secrecy among friends and family. The Church's own people were now the enemy. Villages that had once celebrated harvests together now eyed each other with suspicion. Teachers, bakers, and craftsmen became spies. Conversations in marketplaces ceased. The forbidden texts became a symbol of resistance. Each hidden scroll, each whispered verse, challenged centuries of control. And as the flames in the squares consumed parchment, the seeds of rebellion were planted deep in the hearts of ordinary people. The crusade had begun, not against outsiders, but against the very people who had believed in God's truth all along. The Church's response grew more systematic. No longer content with secret searches or public burnings, a network of inquisitors was formed. They were sent into towns, villages, and even monasteries to root out dissent. Their methods were precise, terrifying, and deliberate. Fear became the weapon. Secrecy became the shield. In the northern valleys, an inquisitor named Brother Theodoric arrived quietly. By day, he prayed alongside villagers in the church. By night, he questioned families behind closed doors. Questions about scripture, sermons, and prayers were recorded meticulously. Every detail could mark a person as heretical. Whisper a forbidden verse, and your name could be written in the secret ledgers. Kingdoms became complicit. Nobles feared being associated with the wrong people. Merchants stopped carrying certain manuscripts. Even the scribes in monasteries were monitored. Ink-stained fingers that copied forbidden knowledge could end a career or a life. The Church's aim was clear: eradicate knowledge that empowered ordinary people, even if it was harmless in itself. Among the oppressed, courage persisted. A young woman named Ilara hid a bundle of manuscripts beneath her bed, risking discovery each night. Farmers and artisans began meeting in barns and forests, teaching lessons their children could not learn in schools. In secret, they built a web of knowledge strong enough to resist decades of suppression. But the inquisitors were relentless. Torture was rare but horrifying when used, designed not to kill but to terrify. Rumors of imprisonment in dark dungeons, starvation, and endless questioning spread faster than the teachings themselves. One simple act, a copied text, a whispered verse, a hidden scroll, was enough to condemn an entire family. The Church justified it as divine will. The people called it betrayal. Faith had become a battlefield, but the battle was invisible to most of the world. Families, once united by belief, now feared each other. Friendships dissolved. Communities that had existed for generations were torn apart, not by foreign invaders, but by fear seeded from within. By the end of the century, the crusade that targeted ordinary citizens had created a society where silence was survival, secrecy was knowledge, and questioning God's authority, even gently, was a crime punishable by destruction. The hidden war was no longer whispers in the dark. It had become an empire of fear. By the early 13th century, the hidden crusade had entrenched itself. Inquisitors moved with the precision of soldiers, their lists of suspected heretics growing longer each year. Every town had informants. Every family held secrets. The Church's authority was absolute, but so too was the fear it inspired. In a remote mountain village, a scholar named Lucian secretly taught the forbidden texts of early Scripture. His students were children, farmers, and artisans, ordinary people hungry for understanding. Lucian knew discovery meant execution, yet he persisted, convinced knowledge could not be extinguished by fear. One night, a black-clad inquisitor arrived, riding through mist and torchlight. Villagers whispered warnings, but Lucian could not abandon his teachings. Scrolls were hidden beneath floorboards, letters burned in hearths, and meetings moved deeper into the forest. Shadows became allies, guiding those who dared to think freely. Meanwhile, nobles grew complicit out of self-preservation. Some turned over neighbors to inquisitors, hoping loyalty to the Church would protect their lands and titles. Others silently aided the scholars, hiding manuscripts in their estates or monasteries far from prying eyes. Trust became currency, suspicion a weapon. The Church also developed psychological methods to control the populace. Confessions were extracted not only through fear of pain, but through the terror of social ruin. To be branded a heretic was to lose one's family, livelihood, and community. Entire towns were destabilized, not by armies from abroad, but by a system designed to break hearts and minds. Even as the Church strengthened its grip, the resistance evolved. Hidden libraries were established in caves, crypts, and abandoned fortresses. Messages were passed through coded letters, symbols etched into walls, and secret songs. Ordinary people became the stewards of forbidden knowledge, preserving what the Church sought to destroy. Yet the shadow of fear was unrelenting. Each raid, each interrogation, each public burning reinforced the Church's dominance, teaching that obedience was survival. Still, whispers of truth persisted. A child would recite a forbidden verse to a friend. A scholar would secretly copy a manuscript. Small acts of courage became acts of rebellion. The crusade within had transformed society. Faith was no longer simple devotion. It had become a battlefield of secrecy, courage, and terror. And the people, though hunted, were learning that knowledge, once discovered, could never truly be taken away. By the mid-13th century, the Church's hidden crusade had created countless martyrs, people who were silenced not by swords, but by fear and secrecy. Villagers whispered names that could not be spoken aloud. Scholars, scribes, and even children became symbols of courage, their mere existence threatening the authority of Rome. In one northern town, Isolde, a young widow, secretly taught children the forbidden scriptures her father had passed down. She hid manuscripts beneath loose floorboards and in hollowed logs. When inquisitors arrived unexpectedly, she destroyed what she could, but even her efforts could not erase all traces. Some manuscripts survived, hidden under stones and in the hands of children too young to speak their secrets. The inquisitors' methods became increasingly cruel, not to kill immediately, but to instill terror. Families were torn apart. One child could betray another under duress, and even a single misplaced glance could be considered complicity. Public burnings were staged to show the consequences of disobedience, while secret interrogations extracted confessions through isolation, deprivation, and psychological torment. Yet in every shadow, resistance continued. Small groups formed, often traveling between villages under the cover of night. They carried forbidden texts, whispered lessons, and hidden knowledge. Each time a life was taken, another spark of defiance emerged somewhere else. Knowledge was now a weapon and a lifeline. Nobles who supported the church turned a blind eye to the suffering in their domains, valuing stability over justice. But some secretly aided the oppressed, hiding manuscripts in castles or monasteries, and funding messengers who traveled hundreds of miles to keep the teachings alive. Courage existed in secrecy, as the very act of preservation became an act of rebellion. By now, the Church realized the futility of complete eradication. The movement could not be fully destroyed, for its ideas had already spread. Whispers, hidden libraries, and underground schools ensured that knowledge, once freed, could never be entirely contained. The crusade that targeted the faithful within Europe had created a paradox. While it instilled fear and obedience, it also forged resilience. Ordinary people, silenced and hunted, had learned that truth was stronger than the decrees of even the most powerful institutions. And in the shadows of Europe, the fire of forbidden knowledge continued to burn quietly, persistently, and indomitably. By the 14th century, the hidden crusade against the faithful had become a dark legacy. Entire communities had learned to live in fear, yet in that fear, knowledge survived. The Church's authority was unquestioned on the surface, but beneath, networks of secret scholars, scribes, and ordinary villagers persisted, passing forbidden teachings from one generation to the next. In a fog-laden valley, a scholar named Matthias carefully copied ancient texts by candlelight, aware that inquisitors could arrive at any moment. He taught the village children prayers and readings that the Church had forbidden, using allegories to hide meaning from outsiders. Every lesson was a gamble. Discovery meant death. The inquisitors had evolved as well. Their reach extended to towns they had never entered before. Travelers were scrutinized, letters intercepted, and whispers in taverns were noted. Punishments were swift and public fines, imprisonment, and sometimes execution. But they could not erase what people had learned in private. Fear and loyalty collided. Families were torn between self-preservation and the duty to protect forbidden knowledge. Mothers whispered verses to their children at night. Fathers hid manuscripts beneath floorboards. Symbols carved into beams and stones served as secret signs, guiding those in the know. Every hidden library, every secret meeting, became a small act of rebellion against the Church's omnipresent power. Meanwhile, nobles who supported the Church found themselves in a precarious position. They were expected to report heresy in their lands, but feared rebellion if they were too aggressive. Some secretly helped the scholars, smuggling texts or providing refuge. Alliances were fragile, built on mutual necessity and unspoken trust. Even as decades passed, the movement grew subtly. Knowledge spread silently through markets, monasteries, and pilgrimage routes. What began as whispers centuries ago had transformed into an invisible web of resistance that no decree, no army, and no public burning could completely sever. The Church had waged war on its own people for over a century, yet it failed to extinguish the spark of knowledge. In hidden chambers and forests, manuscripts survived. In the hearts of ordinary people, courage endured. The forbidden teachings, once suppressed, were now seeds planted deep into the soul of Europe, waiting to bloom when the time was right. The crusade against the faithful had shown one enduring truth: fear can control bodies, but not ideas. By the late 14th century, the crusade against their own people had become a hidden war waged across Europe. Villages, towns, and cities were intertwined in a vast network of fear and secrecy. Ordinary citizens, farmers, merchants, scribes, and artisans had become guardians of forbidden knowledge, passing it from one generation to the next with coded symbols and whispered lessons. In the quiet hills of France, a scholar named Elias maintained a clandestine library beneath the ruins of a monastery. Scrolls and manuscripts, some centuries old, were carefully catalogued, hidden behind false walls and beneath loose stones. Those who knew of its existence risked death merely by stepping inside. Yet they came, guided by courage and curiosity, to learn what had been denied to them for decades. Inquisitors remained relentless. Traveling in pairs or small groups, they scrutinized travelers, intercepted letters, and planted spies within towns. Public trials and executions were carefully staged to deter curiosity. Yet each act of terror only reinforced the secrecy of the underground movement. Every hidden manuscript, every private lesson became a silent rebellion against authority. Among the people, new methods of communication arose. Farmers etched symbols into beams and doorposts. Merchants left coded messages in goods. Children learned songs that carried lessons in allegory. What the Church sought to destroy, the right to think, question, and learn, persisted through ingenuity and courage. Even nobles, outwardly loyal to the Church, sometimes aided the resistance. Hidden libraries in their estates, secret tunnels connecting towns, and clandestine gatherings of scholars allowed forbidden knowledge to survive. Trust and deception became intertwined as the powerful sought to maintain authority while quietly preserving what they feared most: enlightenment. This century-long struggle was not fought with swords, shields, or banners. It was fought in silence, in whispers, in the careful copying of texts, and in the courage of those willing to risk everything for truth. Villages were changed, families fractured, yet the ideas endured, carried in memory and written word. The Church had attempted to erase its own people, but the web of resistance proved resilient. Knowledge could not be extinguished. Faith, though manipulated, became a battlefield, and the very act of learning became rebellion. The hidden war endured, a quiet testament to the power of courage, intellect, and the human spirit. By the 15th century, the hidden crusade against their own people had become a centuries-long saga of fear, courage, and survival. The Church's power remained formidable, but its influence could not completely erase the knowledge and truths that had been passed down in secret. Ordinary citizens had become the stewards of forbidden wisdom, safeguarding manuscripts, scrolls, and oral teachings from inquisitors, fires, and destruction. In a secluded valley in Italy, a scholar named Giovanni uncovered remnants of a library hidden for generations. Manuscripts contained teachings the Church had attempted to suppress, ranging from early scripture interpretations to philosophical works questioning authority. Each page was a relic of rebellion, a spark of thought that had survived centuries of persecution. Inquisitors still moved through towns and villages, but their methods had adapted. Surveillance, coded reports, and covert interrogations replaced large-scale public punishments. Fear remained a powerful tool, but the sheer resilience of the people made total control impossible. Families and communities learned to hide their knowledge in plain sight, disguising it in daily life, songs, and crafts. The Church had unwittingly created a legacy it could not destroy. The more oppressive their tactics, the more creative and careful the people became. Secret societies, hidden schools, and clandestine gatherings flourished in towns and countryside alike. Ordinary men, women, and children had become guardians of history, knowledge, and truth. Across Europe, the network of hidden resistance grew. Scholars communicated through coded letters. Merchants carried secret texts in their goods, and symbols etched into stone and wood conveyed messages across generations. Even nobles who outwardly supported the Church sometimes aided this underground movement, hiding manuscripts in estates, tunnels, and monasteries. By now, the Church's hidden crusade had lost its ability to control entirely. Knowledge, once liberated, could not be fully contained. What had begun as a campaign of fear and suppression had inadvertently created an enduring web of intellect and courage. The seeds planted in whispered verses and hidden scrolls now grew into a quiet revolution of the mind. The ordinary people, hunted and silenced for centuries, had ensured that the forbidden truths survived, proof that authority can destroy bodies, but never ideas. By the 16th century, the centuries-long hidden crusade against the faithful had left an indelible mark on Europe. Entire generations had lived under fear, secrecy, and surveillance. Yet, despite the Church's relentless pursuit, the forbidden knowledge had endured. The ordinary people who had been hunted, silenced, and oppressed had become guardians of history itself. In the quiet hills of Germany, a scholar named Hermann discovered a trove of manuscripts hidden in the ruins of an old monastery. These texts contained centuries of forbidden teachings, scriptures, philosophical writings, and records of resistance. Each page told the story of ordinary people who had risked everything to preserve knowledge that the Church sought to erase. The methods of the Church had evolved, but so had the people. Hidden schools flourished. Libraries were maintained in secret, and networks of communication connected distant villages. Symbols etched into beams, walls, and stone floors conveyed coded messages that only the initiated could read. Even as monarchs and nobles aligned with the Church, they sometimes covertly assisted the resistance, ensuring that manuscripts survived in attics, cellars, and forgotten chambers. By this time, Europe itself had begun to change. Printing presses and increased literacy allowed knowledge to spread more widely, beyond the control of inquisitors and bishops. Ideas, once confined to whispers in the dark, now traveled across towns, cities, and even borders. The Church could no longer contain what it had tried so desperately to suppress. The hidden crusade had left scars, families broken, communities divided, lives lost, but it had also sparked resilience and ingenuity. The ordinary people who had been hunted for centuries had ensured that the forbidden truths survived, transforming oppression into a legacy of courage and perseverance. The story of the crusade against one's own people reminds us of an enduring truth. Knowledge can be threatened, silenced, or hidden, but it cannot be destroyed. The faith, curiosity, and courage of ordinary people created a foundation that would inspire generations to come. Even as the Church's influence persisted, the voices of the forgotten, those who dared to read, to teach, and to preserve, echoed across centuries. They had fought without armies, without banners, and without recognition, yet their victory was eternal. Knowledge had survived. The forbidden crusade may have been hidden from history, but its legacy remains a testament to the power of courage, intellect, and the human spirit.